Make no mistake about it, the Second Amendment will rise or fall based on the federal judiciary. Who is the one that makes up the federal judiciary? The President of the United States. That's the only individual who gets to make appointments, whether it's the United States Supreme Court, whether it's the federal circuit courts, or the federal district trial courts beneath them. Federal Supreme Court, Circuit Court, the Courts of Appeals, or the Federal District Trial Courts. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. We now know who President number 47 will be, President Donald Trump. What does that mean for the Second Amendment? What is going to be the Trump effect on the judiciary this time around? And ultimately, how safe will the Second Amendment be? So guys, let's get into it. The judicial branch, the often forgotten but supremely important third branch of government. These are the folks who get to throw the flag on challenging whether it's what's going on at the state level or at the federal level. What's the fourth branch doing? That's the bureaucratic state. We're talking ATF in particular here. Yes, the judges, the courts, hyper important. There are 9 United States Supreme Court justices. There are 179 federal circuit court judges, and there are 670 federal district court judges. These numbers vary a little bit. These are the positions. Just go with it here. Low resolution, that's 100% correct. Nuances, you get to senior judges and all this other kind of stuff. The details begin to wander. Who gets to fill these positions? The president. The president makes the appointments. They must then be confirmed by the Senate, which means if you're concerned about the makeup of the federal judiciary, then you are concerned about who sits in the White House and who controls the Senate. Moving ahead for at least the next 2 to 4 years, we know the answers to those questions. The Republicans under President Trump, and whatever the makeup of the Senate is, whether it's 52 Republican senators, 53, 54, maybe 55, we'll see. But the simple fact is that they will have a majority, meaning that Trump and the Republicans will be able to salt in the federal judiciary with individuals who have a lifetime appointment. Now, by lifetime appointment, let's narrow this down a little bit. They can serve until they die or retire from office. The average tenure of a United States Supreme Court justice historically has been about 15 years. That's according to multiple different sources. One of them said 15, but historically, that's about where we are. I said historically because since about 1970, the average tenure of a justice has been closer to 28 years. So we have seen a massive change, meaning that controlling the federal judiciary and as a result, being able to give thumbs up or thumbs down to the ATF, whatever they're doing, New York State, Illinois State, Hawaii, you name it, all these different anti-gun locations, what they're doing. And as a result, whether those ideas will percolate across the United States, the federal judiciary is probably the backstop that it will have to come down to. This is the reason why voting for the president, in my mind, look, there's so much that goes into it, but probably the single largest lasting effect has to be the control of the federal judiciary. Okay, so we're going to do 2 things. One, we're going to be taking a specific hard look on the implications of a Trump victory and the Republicans owning the Senate when it comes to the United States Supreme Court. And we're also going to be taking a look at what this means for the federal circuit as well as the federal district court judges. We're going to do this using evidence and history, as I always try to do. So guys, let's look at this one step at a time. We're going to start with the latter portion. We're going to save the United States Supreme Court for last, in part because that's just the way it works in real life. You don't start, or you rarely start, at the United States Supreme Court. You start out the federal district courts, then you appeal to the federal circuit trial courts, and then you go from there up to the United States Supreme Court. Alternatively, if you're going through a state action, so in other words, you go through your state trial court, say New York, Illinois, something like that, then maybe you go to a state court of appeal, then your state Supreme Court, then you kick it up to the United States Supreme Court. But ultimately, U.S. Supreme Court is where we ultimately wind up, at least as potential, if not reality, because keep in mind the U.S. Supreme Court only has the bandwidth to hear in any given year between about 1.5% to maybe 3% of the cases that people try to file with them, right? Because they don't have to hear it. There's too many cases for them to hear, so they don't hear 97% or more of the cases that try to come in, meaning that those 13 United States Courts of Appeal, those are the circuit courts organized by multiple states feed into one typically, those are hyper important because they are quite often the final authority. They're quite often the final spot for an issue gets resolved. Even though it may not have heavy implications beyond persuasive authority, in other words, it's not binding law, outside of the states that they represent. So if the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's based out of Texas, Louisiana, as well as Mississippi, if they say something, it may not have impact, emphasis on may, outside of Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, which means you can sometimes get confusing patchwork law, especially if you get what's called a circuit court split, where let's say one circuit says, yep, that's legal, another one says, nope, it's illegal. That's oftentimes something that compels the U.S. Supreme Court to step in. Let me know in the comment field down below, what do you think will happen? Will Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Samuel Alito retire? Will Trump be able to make appointments that are ideologically fit with what he's trying to do? Or will he appoint someone thinking that they're conservative and actually they wind up flipping and being something totally different, which has happened to Republican presidents before in recent past? Let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that like button. Now back to the video. So as I mentioned before, there are 179 federal circuit court judges. The circuits tend to have anywhere from about 6 to 21. I think the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal has 21 circuit court judges on it. So there's between 6 to 21 judges that typically hear cases with 3 judges on each case, though it can go much bigger than that. There are 670 federal district court judges. Now, let's look at this historically. President Clinton, 2-term president in the 90s, you may remember him. He appointed 287 federal judges. 287 federal judges during 2 terms in office. 62 of them were to the federal circuit courts. Those are bigger deal. 2 United States Supreme Court judges, about 1 per term. President Bush, the younger, 340 United States judges, 61 federal circuit court. Clinton had 62, George Bush had 61. Again, 2 United States Supreme Court judges. President Obama, 334 federal judges, 49 were on the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. So Clinton 62, Bush 61, Obama 49. 2 United States Supreme Court justices. Trump, 1 term, 245 judges, 54, 1 term to the Federal Circuit Court, 3 United States Supreme Court justices. President Biden, numbers are accurate as of December 31st of 2023. We're at 170 overall, 37 are Federal Circuit Court, 1 United States Supreme Court justice. 1 United States Supreme Court justice. All this is cited in the description box down below. So you can see that in an average 4-year term, a president is going to be able to impact approximately 20 to 25% on average of the Federal Circuit Court judiciary. Big deal given the lifetime appointments, let alone, of course, the United States Supreme Court. So controlling the White House, controlling the Senate, ultra important for protection of the Second Amendment. Let's take a closer look now at the United States Supreme Court. There are, of course, 9 justices that are appointed and sit on the United States Supreme Court, 6 of whom are traditionally lumped as being on the more conservative side of the spectrum. Here are their ages. Justice Clarence Thomas is 76, Samuel Alito is 74. These are the 2 oldest judges on the court. Then we get to 3 Trump appointees. We have Brett Kavanaugh at 59, Neil Gorsuch at 57, and Amy Coney Barrett at 52. These are among the 4 youngest judges, along with Justice Jackson, who is 54. That was the lone Biden appointment. So here's the importance. Will Justice Thomas and Justice Alito take the opportunities to retire to ensure that a president can appoint their real-life successor to be ideologically more or less along the lines that they are? What they don't want to have happen, I'm sure, is they don't want to have happen what happened to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she passed away in office. President Trump at the time was able to make an appointment and basically flipped what had been a traditionally liberal left-leaning seat into a conservative seat. That took the court's balance from 5-4 conservative left into a 6-3. If Trump is able to replace Justice Thomas and Alito with someone younger, someone in their, say, mid to upper 40s. Justice Thomas was appointed at age 43, if memory serves. He was very young for a United States Supreme Court justice. If President Trump is able to flip these two positions and basically reload with people who are 25 to 30 years younger, this could assure a conservative majority on the court for literally decades. Literally decades, probably about 20 or so years. We're talking about 2045, give or take, if all else holds equal. This is the importance of winning the White House. This is the importance of winning the Senate. This is not a right-left thing. I'm not trying to score points for Team Red, Team Blue. It has nothing to do with that. We're simply talking about which sides tend to support and which sides tend to be antagonistic to the Second Amendment. And right now, we can have all the prognostications we want to about the left eventually turning into pro-gun, you name it. If anything, maybe the left's fear of President Trump will help to spur that development along. I don't know. Time will tell. The question then becomes, will Justices Thomas and Alito actually retire? A lot of people are saying that Justice Alito will likely retire spring or summer of 2025, given the election developments. So if that happens, that will probably flip. I've read a number of quotes and attributions and heard different things about it. We'll see what happens, but that seems like the better bet of the two. Let's put it that way. Justice Thomas, on the other hand, much more difficult to predict. I've seen quotes and attributions suggesting that Justice Thomas has said that he basically wanted to be in office for 43 years. I'm not going to go into why he said that and anchored on such a specific number, but I've seen quotes and attributions saying that he wants to be in there for 43 years. That would take him out beyond this Trump term. And of course, that would make it risky as to whether or not he's going to have someone who's going to come along or whether or not he will turn into another Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's also another stream of thought when it comes to Justice Thomas, and I'm going to go into the weeds on this a bit here, that in 2023, according to Newsweek, there was an investigative news website called ProPublica. You may have heard of it. Depending upon your viewpoint, they're a bunch of smear merchants or they're doing cutting-edge journalism. I'm not here to say one way or the other. I'm simply saying, look, this is out there. I'm going to mention it as a result, but take it with a grain of salt and do your own investigation. ProPublica alleged that Justice Thomas threatened to resign in the 2000s if he did not receive a salary increase. Classified documents showed that Republican lawmakers sought to introduce an increase in Supreme Court salaries to stop him from resigning, the report said. The legislation, however, was ultimately not passed. However, soon afterwards, according to ProPublica, Justice Thomas began allegedly receiving vacations and other gifts from wealthy Republican donors, the outlet reported. Now, Thomas is just a few years shy of being the longest-serving Supreme Court justice, a record currently held by Justice William O. Douglas. As a heads up, maybe that's something that also means something to him as well. Don't know. No one can compel him to retire, but this is where we are at. Bottom line, when it comes to taking a look at the federal judiciary, I like what I see. That's the bottom line here. I'm very excited about the fact that we are going to be able to now salt in 4 years of pro 2A judges, looking at it only through that lens, pro Second Amendment judges here, and it's going to help to stem the tide and hopefully flip some of these circuits from being anti-gun or hit or miss to being actually very pro Second Amendment and pro individual rights. Our quote of the day, perhaps appropriately, comes from John Locke. Quote, "The reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property." Keep in mind, as I've said before, all rights fundamentally come down to property rights. You want your right to Second Amendment? Well, you're going to need a firearm, you're going to need ammunition, you need a place to purchase it, a place to practice shooting it, you name it. Freedom of speech? Well, you're going to type on the internet, you're going to do that on paper. Where is this happening? You're going to stand on what soapbox located on what piece of land? You name it. Not almost, all rights do come down to property rights. keep that in mind. And hopefully, while you're keeping that in mind, you'll hit that like button and join the discussion down in the comment field down below. What do you think is going to happen? Will Justice Alito actually wind up retiring? Will Justice Thomas wind up retiring? Does all this go nowhere? What happens? Let me know down in the comment field below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.